A text says, "You're on my mind." A bouquet from 1-800-Flowers says, "You're my everything." Heartfelt moments belong in the real world, not just your phone. For 50 years, 1-800-Flowers has helped millions of people make memories that'll last a lifetime with gifts they'll cherish forever. Their expertly curated arrangements and gift baskets ship nationwide with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Don't wait for the next big moment. Make it when you visit 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast.
Breaking news for your home. Way Day. Wayfair's big sale is almost here, and you can score the best deals in home. Like up to 80% off everything home. Yes, you heard that right. 80% off with free shipping on everything. Plus surprise flash deals all Way Day long. We're talking outdoor furniture and essentials, rugs, and more. All at Wayfair, and all up to 80% off during Way Day. Shop Wayfair's Way Day from April 25th through 27th.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Campus Killings, Below the Surface, and Killer Communications. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1988. On August 28th, fishermen Norm McDaniel and Lonnie Russell were taking advantage of the warm late summer weather to try their luck angling in the Puyallup River. This was near Sumner in Pierce County, Washington State. Around 11 a.m., the men drove down a dirt road off State Street, parked in the well-used sandy parking area, and arrived at the rocky river's edge, rods and bait buckets in tow. But there they stopped short. About 75 feet away from them, something was partially submerged in the shallow water on a spit of sand at the confluence of the Puyallup and Stuck rivers, something that didn't belong in the water. It was the nude body of a woman. Officer Pigman of the Sumner PD received the call and drove to meet Lonnie and Norm. They led him to the area where they had found the body. The officer could not immediately get close because the body lay across one of the river branches and the muddy water was rushing. The dead woman lying on a sandbar was actually outside the jurisdiction of the Sumner PD, so the Pierce County Sheriff's Department was called in, and investigators Sergeant Steve Bisson and Deputy Pam Jordan arrived at the scene at 12:44, followed closely by multiple fire department personnel. They all gathered at the shore where Norm and Lonnie had planned to fish. This area was very rocky, but surrounded by beautiful, verdant, tall trees. It should have been an idyllic spot. I watched the video of the body recovery, led by Puyallup Fire Chief Merle Frank. Some of the men waded out into the river and were able to get to where the victim lay by sloshing through thigh-high water. One man carried what looked like a bodyboard. Still others, wearing waders and life preservers, ferried one by one across to the rocky spit in an orange inflatable fire department dinghy tied with ropes that were used by men on shore to direct its trajectory. Civilian onlookers and cops stood on a grassy hillside nearby using binoculars to see what was going on. Finally, several of the men were able to disembark, help their fellow rescue workers over, and then approach the body. I couldn't hear what they were saying on the video because of the rapids rushing by in both river branches. The woman was lying face down, partially submerged in shallow rapids, sort of on the spit of sand right at the fork where the Puyallup River flows into the Stuck. She was clearly deceased, but had no visible injuries to her body other than some abrasions on her back that could have been drag marks, and could have been from being tossed around the rocks by the river water. The rescuers turned her over and again noted few evident injuries. The rescue workers stood in the shallow water around the body and lifted it onto a tarp. The whole bundle was tied up with ropes and then carried by 3 men to the waiting dinghy on the other side of the spit between the rivers. She was placed in the dinghy, and rescue workers on the shore pulled it across, using multiple ropes affixed to the dinghy's bow and stern. Rescue workers lifted the dripping bundle out of the inflatable and carried it up the hill. She was set down on the sandy path leading to the parking lot while the investigators waited for an ambulance. Then the dinghy had to make several more trips to ferry back the rescue workers on the spit. Detective Art Anderson, Dean Patterson, and John Reich of the medical examiner's office, and identification officer Van Victor arrived and surveyed the body. Then the Jane Doe was loaded up and taken to the medical examiner's office. An autopsy was performed on the Jane Doe on August 29th by forensic pathologist Dr. Emmanuel Lexina. She was a white female, 5 foot 5 inches tall, 127 pounds, with brownish red hair below her shoulders and green eyes. Each ear was pierced twice, but she wore no jewelry. She had a contact lens only in her right eye. She was guessed to be in her late teens to early 20s. The body was in good condition, exhibited some rigor, and was estimated not to have been in the water longer than 8 to 10 hours. Identification officer Van Victor was assigned to take photos prior to the commencement of the autopsy. His report indicates that he photographically documented photos of red dotting on the victim's eyelids, bruising on her body, a viscous fluid on her inner thigh area, bruising on her ankles, and tearing injuries in her anal and vaginal areas. The cause of death was multiple blunt force trauma coupled with strangulation and smothering injuries. The manual strangulation had caused petechial hemorrhaging, bruising on the upper and lower lips and mouth area, bruising and abrasions on both sides of the neck, and infiltration hemorrhages of the internal strap muscles of the neck and the muscles of the larynx. The homicide victim had suffered blunt force trauma on the upper right chest, upper left chest, medial aspects of both upper arms, left side of her face, and the left front of her knee. Bruising was also noted under the left breast, and she had trauma to both sides of her head causing hemorrhaging between her scalp and skull. But that wasn't all. The Jane Doe had foreign fingernail marks on her left forearm, a possible bite mark resulting in a contusion on her left breast surrounding the nipple, and another possible bite mark on her left posterior hip. This is a bit graphic, but the left breast of the Jane Doe was removed and frozen by the pathologist, retained for bite mark comparison purposes. And when a rape kit was administered, suspected seminal fluid was found in her rectum, which exhibited abrasions. Fingernail scrapings from both hands and pubic hair trimmings and combings were collected. Jane Doe's blood alcohol level was 0.08. Detective Anderson's report was quite thorough. He noted that the area surrounding the body recovery site was semi-rural, with small businesses and few residences. The closest landmark was the sewage treatment plant for the city of Sumner. He noted that it appeared that the victim floated down the Puyallup River, as at the point where she was lying, the water from the Puyallup flowed over the sandbar and down into the Stuck. She could not have gotten to where she lay in shallow rapids on the sandbar if she had been deposited in the Stuck River. The scene where the Jane Doe was found was thoroughly searched and processed. Men from the Marine Services Unit and CSIs scoured the riverbanks and surrounding areas for footprints, tire tracks, clothing items, and other physical evidence. Photos and video were taken documenting the scene and also flow patterns of the water. Then 4 divers entered the river and searched the depths, but also found nothing. The dirt road leading to the body recovery site was very fine sand and heavily traveled, therefore no individual tire tracks could be determined. Based on the water flow in the river, the location of the body, and the few possible options as to areas where the body could have entered the water, detectives concluded, quote, "The most likely place where the body entered the river was a car bridge passing over the Puyallup River, a mile upstream from the body. A body thrown over the bridge's low railing would enter the main channel of the Puyallup River, and no obstructions would keep the body from being carried downstream," end quote. After the body discovery site processing was completed, detectives turned to trying to identify the Jane Doe. Fingerprints collected at her autopsy were not in the systems at Pierce County, Tacoma County, King County, Seattle, or the State Identification Office in Olympia. Van Victor sent an inked fingerprint card of the unknown deceased female to the Assistant Director of the Identification Bureau of the FBI on September 8, 1988. He requested that a search of the FBI files be conducted, but the FBI had no file on her either. Dental scans were collected from Jane Doe at her autopsy in the event a missing persons report was located, but In the days and weeks after she was found, no missing person report meshed with her details. This is surprising as she didn't appear to be homeless or a drug addict. Her body was well nourished and well cared for. Jane Doe was submitted to NCIC and VICAP and was placed into the state's unidentified body and missing persons computerized database. Detective Nabel was assigned to review NCIC reports of missing young women throughout the U.S., but no descriptions matched their Jane Doe, who had a large scar on her ankle that was noted in her details. So the medical examiner's office commissioned an artist's sketch to be prepared of her face, based on Polaroids taken at her autopsy, and they circulated it with a request for information. The Pierce County Sheriff's Department did not approve of the quality of this sketch and prepared their own. The images and Jane Doe bulletins, including the 2 different sketches and a detailed description, were sent to local agencies, broadcasted news reports, and run in the newspapers throughout the state. Detectives followed up on a lot of leads called in by the public saying that Jane Doe looked like a tenant in their building or their cousin or someone who worked at the local 7-Eleven, and so on. One tip stated that Jane Doe looked like a woman named Lisa L., who waitressed at a Chinese restaurant in Sumner. Detectives tried to track down Lisa, but no one seemed to know where she was because she traveled with a boyfriend and had no fixed address. No one had been in touch with her since late August. Acquaintances of Lisa were brought to view the body and believed that Jane Doe was indeed Lisa. An aunt of Lisa's said that she had been bitten by a dog and had a scar on her left ankle and double pierced ears, and her age was the same as Jane Doe's was estimated to be. Detectives finally got in touch with Lisa's sister in Massachusetts, who said everything sounded just like her sister except that she had hazel, not green eyes. She gave 2 photos of her sister to the Massachusetts State Police, who faxed them to Pierce County, whose report says, quote, "From the quality of the photos, it cannot be determined if Lisa is the subject or not. No dental files or fingerprints are known to be available for Lisa," end quote. Lisa's sister Janine finally sent in some actual photos, and detectives compared them to the autopsy photos. Many of the investigators felt that Lisa and Jane Doe were probably the same person, but there were a few subtle differences. So Lisa's aunt came into the Pierce County Medical Examiner's office and viewed the body from several different angles. After the viewing, she said she felt that Jane Doe was her niece, Lisa, but she couldn't be certain. The family in Massachusetts tracked down a dentist who had treated Lisa, and her dental scans were hand-delivered to a Dr. Hampel for comparison on October 4th, 1988. He quickly determined that the deceased and Lisa were not the same person. When detectives called Lisa's sister Janine, she told them a family member had just received a phone call from Lisa, and she was alive and well in New Mexico. Well, back to square one on identifying Jane Doe. The contact lens in her right eye, removed at her autopsy, was submitted for analysis to see if a prescription and brand name could be determined. Dr. Larry McAtee determined the lens was a 3.25 power, meaning that the decedent was nearsighted. And the unusually small diameter told him that the contact was manufactured by one of only 4 companies and was an older version, dating from approximately 8 years prior. But it was too onerous to contact 4 major contact lens companies like Ciba and Vision Aqua, so that lead was abandoned. Detectives interviewed the Fisher guys who found her, Norm and Ronnie, but they didn't know anything. A Washington State Patrol crime lab report by Chris Sewell on October 27, 1988, reported the following. Tests on samples taken from Jane Doe detected semen on the vaginal, rectal, and right thigh swabs. No blood type of the donor could be determined because only type O was detected and Jane Doe herself was type O. Neither the left hand nor right hand fingernail clippings had any evidence of blood, tissue, or fibers. The vaginal swabs, deemed the strongest evidence of semen, were sent to Forensic Science Associates, a private lab in California. The lab was requested to obtain a DNA profile for comparison purposes should a suspect be developed. This was one of the earliest references I've seen to DNA being used in a homicide investigation in the U.S. This was late 1988. The results of the DNA analysis received in September 1989 were inconclusive. A detective's report says, somewhat confusingly, quote, "The lab was forced to grow the cultures to obtain enough sample to test and report that they cannot separate the 2 sources of cells, epithelial cells and sperm cells. It's possible they cloned the victim's cells and not the suspects because only 8% of the population is 4-4. In other words, we can't really sure what we've got here." The 4-4 was referring to the Jane Doe's DQ alpha blood type 4-4. The vaginal swabs were returned to the Pierce County Sheriff's Office and placed back in evidence in March 1990. The bite mark on her breast was not of high quality. It was not usable to identify suspects, although it was retained in the event it could be used to eliminate potential suspects based on their bites. Speaking of suspects, on September 8th, police finally obtained a suspect name via a tip. 2 weeks after Jane Doe was found, a man named Dan S. was fishing at the junction of the Puyallup and Stuck Rivers when he ran into a man named Larry C. Larry fished there regularly, and Dan had seen him there before. Dan described Larry as a white male, 30 to 40 years old, a Vietnam vet. They struck up a conversation and started talking about the deceased woman found in the river. Larry made some strange comments about the girl having real nice brown hair and real pretty hazel eyes. The tone of his voice and his manner of speaking made Dan very suspicious, considering what he was saying about the dead girl. All sketches printed in the media and run in the television stations were black and white, so comments about her pretty hazel eyes were definitely odd. Pierce County detectives Gibbs and Nabel tracked down Larry C. the next day, finding him fishing at the river's edge once again. During his interview, he was visibly nervous to the investigators' eyes. He was asked about the comments he made about the victim in the river. Quote, Larry said he heard that the victim had brown hair and hazel eyes on a radio station. So he brought it up when he talked about it with people so that perhaps someone would be able to identify her, he said. Larry also admitted that he was present when the body was removed from the river. He was one of the people watching from a distance. He had just happened to be fishing nearby when the body was found, he said. Well, we all know that sometimes means involvement. Larry denied having anything to do with the murder of the victim found in the river. He did not know who she was or anything about it, he said. Larry had a significant record that could have been the reason he was nervous about being questioned by police. He had been arrested for statutory rape 1 in 1983. This was for the rape of his own daughter, who was 9 or 10 years old. Yes, a statutory rape charge for a child rape. He ended up being convicted of just indecent liberties for that incident. He did some time in Western State and was a registered sex offender. Detectives tracked down and interviewed Larry's ex-wife, who had moved away with their kids to protect them from their father. She said Larry was violent, had raped their daughter, and had told her, I've had this problem for a long time, meaning about raping people. Although the file says investigation to be continued, later notes say no other follow-up with Larry C. was noted. He was not eliminated formally. Hey guys, let's talk money. I don't know about you, but I like to keep my money where I can see it. Unfortunately, traditional, big wireless carriers also like keeping my money too. After years of overpaying for wireless, I finally got fed up with crazy high wireless bills, bogus fees, and free perks that actually cost more in the long run. I switched to Mint Mobile and never looked back. When is the last time you really looked at your big wireless bill? Do you even know what all those extra charges are? If you're being honest, probably not. Stop overpaying for wireless just because that's how it's always been. Mint exists purely to fix that. Cut out all the bogus charges, fees, and hidden costs. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at just $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Of course, you can keep your phone number, activate with eSIM in minutes, and start saving immediately. No long-term contracts, no hassle. I use Mint Mobile and you should too. I can't bear to think about how much money I wasted paying for big wireless before I made the switch. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/DNAID. That's mintmobile.com/DNAID. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Hi guys, I'm here once again to rave about Thrive Market's membership-based grocery delivery service. My husband and I are health conscious and particular about what's in the food we eat. Thrive Market makes mindful grocery shopping a no-brainer. Here's how it works. For just $5 a month, you get access to a curated selection of organic and non-GMO brands with over 1,000 restricted ingredients you don't want in your food. You don't have to worry about peering at labels or Googling crazy chemical-sounding additives because Thrive Market vets all their products for you. Have a favorite product you want to swap for a healthier version? Thrive Market's in-app barcode scanner finds a healthier version of pretty much anything in your pantry. And they offer more than 90 dietary filters for your shopping convenience. Want only low-sugar products? Are you gluten-free? Just check the filter, and the products listed for you will meet all your criteria. Now, I know you're thinking, I bet all this convenience and security is pricey. Not so. At just $5 a month, the membership pays for itself. For less than the price of a latte a month, you get member pricing of 30% off products, weekly sales, free delivery, and free gifts. Forget tips and delivery fees. You won't have those at Thrive Market. Use Thrive Market like I do. I think you'll love it. But if for some reason you don't, you can cancel within 30 days for a full refund on your annual membership. It's risk-free. Ready to do your own spring reset? Join Thrive Market with my link, thrivemarket.com/DNAID for $20 off your first 3 orders. Plus, you'll get a free $60 gift. That's thrivemarket.com/DNAID. Another lead followed up by investigators in mid-October was into a batch of credit cards and a Social Security card that were found in the same exact area where the Jane Doe was found. The cards belonged to a Petra B., the wife of a Donald B., a soldier in the U.S. Army. Army CID agent Tom Stewart and Detective Reinicke interviewed Petra and Dawn and found out that her cards had been stolen after her van was broken into in Tacoma in the first part of October. Petra didn't report her credit cards missing, she said, because they were maxed out. The detectives were incredulous at this. They showed Petra a photo of Jane Doe with her eyes closed, and she viscerally reacted to the photo, shrinking back as if repulsed. They asked her why she reacted that way, and she said because it looked to her like that person in the photo was dead. They told her she was dead, and she had washed up in the river very near where the credit cards were found. At this, the detectives noted that Donald B. became very tense and started flexing his jaw and clenching his fists. He was in the process of being court-martialed by the U.S. Army for his continual AWOL status, as he had often just disappeared for days at a time. Both detectives came away from the interview thinking that Petra and Donald needed to be investigated further. Petra submitted to a polygraph exam on October 19th and was deemed to be telling the truth. I don't know if Donald was also polygraphed. Then, on October 24th, Detective Reinicke received a very important phone call from Detective Mike Hatch of the King County Department of Public Safety. Hatch said he had a possible identity for the Pierce County Jane Doe. A missing persons report had been filed on Sunday, October 23rd in King County, and Detective Hatch felt after comparing the physical descriptions of the Jane Doe and the missing young woman that they likely had a match. What happened was, a man named Donald H., who worked at the garden shop at Kmart, reported his coworker missing to the King County DPS. Dave told the police that his coworker and friend had not been seen or heard from since August 26th, had not reported to work, and hadn't picked up her August 31st paycheck. Dave knew a lot about his coworker, including that her ears were double pierced and she wore contact lenses. He said she lived in Federal Way and she had a boyfriend named Jeff A. Pierce County detectives, finally armed with a potential name for their Jane Doe, consulted the dental office of the dentist for the missing young woman, who compared the dental scans of Jane Doe to the scans of his patient. They were a match. Finally, 2 months after the Jane Doe had been found in the river, detectives knew who she was: Tracy Jean Whitney. Detective Hatch noted that although the missing persons report had just been filed for Tracy, she had not been seen since about August 26, 1988. That time frame meshed with when she was found in the river. So on October 24th, Detective Hatch, Detective Reinicke, and Detective Nabel went to the home of Ronald and Wendy Whitney at 2251 Southwest 331st Street in Federal Way. There, they informed Tracy Whitney's parents that their daughter was deceased and had been a Jane Doe for 2 months. The report stated that the parents were emotional, but when they calmed down, the detectives were able to interview them. This is a good time to talk about who Tracy was. Tracy was born on March 12, 1970, to Ronald and Wendy Whitney. She had a younger sister, Robin, who was only 11 when Tracy was killed. Tracy attended Decatur High School in Federal Way. She played soccer, and her sister Robin said that she looked up to her older sister. She described Tracy as almost a mother to her, someone who spent time with her digging for clams and doing sister stuff, even though they were 7 years apart. In mid-1988, Tracy was 18 years old and was employed by Kmart in Federal Way, where she worked in the garden shop. That's where she had befriended Dave H., the guy who reported her missing. Tracy was not living with her parents, but in the Federal Way home of her boyfriend, Jeff A., and his mother, Janice. Jeff A. and Tracy had been together for a couple of years, but had broken up in the spring of 1988 for several months, during which time Tracy dated a guy named Dale. But Jeff and Tracy got back together in midsummer. Letters between them that I read are quite emotionally charged, with declarations of undying love, determination to make things work, and vows never to hurt each other. They were clearly deeply in love, as much as two teenagers can be, but they had significant problems as well. The two had a pretty stormy on-again, off-again relationship, and they were noted to argue quite a bit. However, no one reported any physical abuse. It's clear that Tracy's parents did not care for Jeff A. at all. Her parents and some of her friends faulted Jeff for Tracy starting to drink alcohol and possibly smoke some pot. Tracy started cutting school to hang out with Jeff, and her parents were not happy about this turn of events. They made Tracy go to counseling, but the divide between parents and daughter grew. Tracy left home in 1987 and started living with her girlfriend Carrie, and then moved in with Jeff and his mom. She maintained a relationship with her parents and went to the mall with her mom on Saturdays. And eventually she returned to living in the Whitney household in October of 1987. They all went to counseling, she got the job in the garden center at Kmart, she resumed going to school, and she started dating the guy named Dale. I'm not clear on whether she graduated from Decatur, but she left home again and moved in with Jeff in June of 1988. In one of the letters found in Tracy's purse in her room, written to her father, mother, and sister Robin, Tracy wrote that she loved them very much, but that she loved Jeff and she didn't want to live without him. Quote, I know you will never accept him, so that's why I must leave. I know I could never live in this house if I'm back with Jeff because it's too hard, too much tension. I love you, Dad, Mom, and Robin. I'm sorry I've hurt you so much. I can't help my feelings for Jeff. No matter how terrible you think he is, I know the truth. Always, Tracy. Police reports I reviewed said Tracy was not close with her own parents and that she had a bit of a rebellious streak. The language in the police report I reviewed is a bit judgmental of Tracy, saying that she liked to party, which from the interviews I read with her friends was not really true. The report says, quote, Tracy was something of a free spirit. She maintained a living arrangement with one boyfriend, Jeff, while dating other young men. It was rumored that Tracy used marijuana. Tracy also drank and partied. Her relationship with her parents was not good, end quote. It's really not clear how not good things were between Tracy and her parents. A letter I read from Tracy's dad to her after she moved in with Jeff said that he loved her very much, but the way she was living and the choices she was making were all wrong. He wrote, I always felt we understand each other. Whether you like it or not, we're quite a bit alike, hard-headed. Love, Dad. It sounded very much like a typical clash between an independent young woman and her parents, who wanted different things for her. But Detective Nabel heard from a friend of Tracy's, Michelle S., that Tracy had encountered domestic violence in her parents' home. Janice, Jeff's mom, also told Detective Nabel and Detective Reinecke that Tracy lived with her because of domestic violence issues at her own home. Now, we only have Tracy's word that this was going on, and it's possible she exaggerated the situation at home so Janice would not send her home and she could keep living with Jeff. And Tracy's parents acknowledged none of this in their interview with detectives. They said basically that at age 16, Tracy started to become rebellious and got mixed up with Jeff A., who was a couple of years older. He was a bad influence, they maintained. Through him, they suspected she became involved in drugs and started skipping school, and they tried to get her to straighten out. She eventually left home because of discipline problems and moved in with Jeff. They had not seen their daughter since early August, when she came by the house to get some of her clothing, at which point they had an ugly altercation. But Ronald admitted that he had drunk a six-pack and gotten in his truck and gone over and demanded to talk to Tracy. Janice answered the door and said she doesn't want to talk to you. So he parked outside Jeff and Janice's house and sat there. Janice called the police. The officers told Ronald if he harassed Janice and Jeff again, they would arrest him. As I said, things between Tracy and her boyfriend Jeff were very up and down. They were living together and both had jobs, but it seems as though Tracy was discontented and restless. Her friend Denise said Tracy was sometimes bored with Jeff because they didn't really do much together. Tracy's Kmart coworker and friend Dennis C. told police that Tracy was confused and upset lately about the situation she had gotten herself into. And that situation was that she was living with Jeff, but had been seeing another guy off and on for about 6 weeks, a guy named Dwayne. In his interview with detectives, Jeff admitted that Dwayne and Tracy had been seeing each other during the times when he and Tracy were, quote, on a break, even though friends hadn't been invented yet. Jeff considered Dwayne to be a romantic rival. It was clear he was less than thrilled about the Dwayne situation, whatever that situation even was. According to several friends, Tracy felt very guilty about cheating on Jeff with Dwayne, as they had hooked up recently at a small party at Jeff's house. Carrie T., a friend of Tracy's from high school, told the investigators that it was an open secret that Tracy was dating Dwayne while also dating Jeff. She said in mid-August, Jeff had had a party at his house, and Tracy and Dwayne had gone upstairs together to hook up. Jeff was drunk and got pissed off about his girlfriend hooking up with someone else, and he got violent, pounding holes in the walls and yelling and screaming. Jeff then got into it with Dwayne, pushing him and trying to start a fight. Dwayne was older and told him to knock it off. Carrie said that Jeff and Dwayne did not get along. The detectives asked Carrie what she thought had happened to Tracy when she went missing. She said, "We just thought she was living somewhere because she had to get away because she was the type of person, that would just take off somewhere. She had to get away for a while." It sounded to the police like Jeff and Dwayne should both be on the suspect list. Before the hookup at the party incident, Tracy had written Dwayne a note saying she wanted to stop seeing each other because she was very confused and hated hurting people, meaning Jeff. But she apparently never gave him this note, and they started hanging out again. And according to Dwayne, Tracy told him that nothing was going on between her and Jeff, and she was just living with him because she needed a place to stay. So she was kind of balancing two guys, which was why police thought she was kind of flighty. Tracy's very close friend Brenda M. said that Tracy was a bit shy and was not a partier. She knew Jeff was going nowhere in life, but she loved him. Brenda described Tracy as super confused at this point in her life, wanting a change, and said she was thinking about totally turning her life around, moving in with Brenda or with an aunt of hers who was getting divorced. Okay, so that's the state of Tracy's life when she was killed. After taking 2 months to identify her, detectives now had an uphill battle of trying to fill out the timeline for Tracy's last few days, 2 months after the fact. They started with Jeff A., since he was arguably the closest to Tracy, and because, well, it's always the husband or boyfriend. Jeff said that on the morning of Saturday, August 27th, he and Tracy woke up and had sex, and then he went to work at the Exxon station. Tracy was going water skiing that day. After work, he went for a beer with some buddies and got back to his mother's house between 9 and 9:30. When he got home, he found a note written by Tracy which said she had gone out for the evening with Dwayne and Bill. So rather than waiting around for Tracy, Jeff went over to his friend Ken L's house and stayed there until about 11:30. Then he went home, but Tracy never came back. I don't know if detectives found this note in Tracy's things or if Jeff handed it over, but the note Tracy left for Jeff on that Saturday night said, "Jeff, you know what? You really pissed me off. I told you I'd be home after you got home from work or a little afterwards. I was invited to a barbecue with Brenda and other friends, and we came here to get you, but no Jeff. Oh well, whatever, right." Tracy seemed to rethink this entire note because on the bottom of the same piece of paper she wrote, "Ignore the first part." Then it continued, "Hun, I'm not that mad, just a bit irritated. I don't feel like staying home, so I'm going out with Dwayne and Bill. You'll probably be mad, but I hate sitting here without you. I hope you won't be too mad. I know that you trust me, so you shouldn't be too mad. I love you. See you later, babe. Love always, Tracy." And then Trace plus Jeffrey forever. Jeff became quite emotional while the detectives were reading this note. He said he was very upset when Tracy went missing and failed to turn up. They asked him if it was like Tracy to go out with Dwayne and Bill, and he said yes, that Tracy and Dwayne had gone out a few times and she claimed they were just friends. But he thought they were more than friends. Every time he brought it up with Tracy, they ended up getting in a fight about it. But he said whatever was going on, he didn't think it was serious. Tracy had gone water skiing on that Saturday with her friend Brenda M. Brenda and Tracy had met working at Kmart and were very close. Brenda knew all about Tracy's emotional turmoil relating to her relationship with her parents and the two guys she was seeing. Brenda told Detective Nabel that she and Tracy had water skied at Lake Tapps that Saturday, and then Tracy decided to go home and find Jeff. But she never heard from her again. Detectives spoke with Jeff's mother, Janice, who said that on the evening of Saturday, August 27th, she remembered the exact date because her boyfriend was having emergency surgery in the hospital that day. Tracy was bored because Jeff hadn't come home from work, and around 9 p.m. she told Janice she was going out with friends. This was very common, and Janice literally thought nothing of it. Jeff had been annoyed about this when he got home and found out Tracy had left with Dwayne and Bill. He called his and Tracy's friend Denise and expressed that he was upset. None of them ever saw Tracy again. Detectives found it very odd, a red flag in fact, that Jeff A. never reported Tracy missing. He said he called around to her friends to look for her, but that was the extent of it. Denise, who was dating Jeff's friend Ken L., said that Jeff called around Labor Day and was mad that Tracy hadn't called her come home. He made an offhand remark that maybe she was dead. Of course, she was dead, and had been since the very night she left Jeff the note saying she was going out. Jeff told the police he did not report Tracy missing because he thought she simply found a new place to live. I guess he didn't think it was weird that Tracy left behind her clothes, personal items, purse, and cat. Now he handed those things over to the police. He also told them that he'd given Tracy a gold chain with a heart-shaped charm with an arrow through it. He said that she wore that necklace constantly and never took it off. But she was found without it. Police were very suspicious of Jeff and considered him their prime suspect. The officers asked Janice why she hadn't reported Tracy Whitney missing. She said that Jeff and Tracy lived in the basement, had their own entrance and exit, and she never went down there. What happened down there was their business. And she hadn't realized how much stuff Tracy had left down there. She took Jeff's word when he said that Tracy had left probably with another guy. After Tracy was identified and it turned out she'd been murdered, Janice said Jeff showed very genuine grief and she did not feel that he was in any way responsible. Police investigated Jeff thoroughly, but they couldn't tie him to the crime. For one thing, he had no car, no access to a car, and no license. His mom said he never had a license and he wasn't a very good driver. She certainly would not have let him use her car. So he had no way to transport Tracy to the river. After Tracy was found, Jeff moved to Oregon in October, but voluntarily returned to town for a follow-up interview when requested. Months later, he submitted blood and saliva samples and passed the polygraph. Of course, the next people on detectives' list were persons of interest Dwayne and Bill. They were, as the police report puts it, the last people to see Tracy alive. Detective Reinecke interviewed Dwayne and Bill at length. Dwayne admitted that he and Tracy had fooled around in her room during the party at Jeff's house. On that last night in August, Dwayne and Bill picked up Tracy in Bill's car, and they all went bowling. They couldn't remember the exact date and thought it was a Tuesday night in late August, but it was determined to be Saturday, August 27th. The group bowled at Tacoma Lanes and Federal Way and had some beers and 2 wine coolers for Tracy. Dwayne and Tracy were hugging and cuddling a bit. Then they went to the nearby Burger King, where Tracy and Dwayne teased each other, but Dwayne hurt Tracy's feelings, saying something jokingly about that he didn't want to see her anymore. Whatever Dwayne said set Tracy off. She was in tears and she went to the bathroom. Then she came out and sat alone at a different table. When Dwayne went to the bathroom, she got up and walked out of the Burger King. When Dwayne got back from the bathroom, he said, "Dude, where's Tracy?" And Bill said, "She just went out the door." Dwayne went out to the parking lot and didn't see her anywhere. She was already gone. The time was sometime after 11 p.m. Dwayne and Bill finished their meals, and within 5 minutes of Tracy walking out, got in their car and started driving around looking for her. They took all the routes that she might have used to walk home, 320th Street and 99, but they never found her. They did not knock on Janice and Jeff's door to see if she'd made it home. Dwayne called the house the next morning and asked for Tracy, but was simply told by Janice that she wasn't home. He assumed that Tracy had gone home and gone back out, or didn't want to talk to him. Over the next few days, he called around to her friends asking if they'd seen her, but no one had. Dwayne told her friend Carrie that they had had an argument about breaking up at the Burger King and that Tracy was going back to being exclusive with Jeff. Bill, on the other hand, didn't see Dwayne for the next week. Then he ran into Jeff and learned that Tracy had never come home that Saturday night. That's when he told Jeff that she had walked out of the Burger King and they couldn't find her. The incident at the Burger King appeared to be the last time any of Tracy's friends or family had heard from her. Dwayne was the only one who could recall what Tracy was wearing that last night when they were together. She was wearing a light blue shirt with short sleeves and a breast pocket. He believed she was wearing blue jeans. No one could remember whether she had earrings on. Bill was asked all about whether he ever had a thing with Tracy and so on. No, he said, he didn't really know her very well. But he said he did begin to become concerned when he learned a week or so later that she had never shown up again. He told detectives that he felt guilty about letting her walk out of the Burger King alone. He said he encouraged her boyfriend Jeff to file a missing persons report, but Jeff apparently did not take his advice. Detectives asked Jeff point blank what he thought of Dwayne and Bill's story that Tracy just walked out and disappeared. He said he didn't really buy it, but then again, he couldn't imagine Dwayne or Bill doing something like that. Quote, he said he'd known Dwayne for 4 or 5 years, and he wasn't that kind of person. He said when he woke up the next morning and Tracy hadn't come home, he, quote, just assumed that, she'd gone out with them partying someplace. Maybe they'd gone out drinking and she just decided to stay at one of their houses, maybe they were too drunk and they didn't want to drive her home or whatever. Maybe she just decided to stay there that night. And then when I got home from work that afternoon, that's when I started, getting worried, end quote. He said Dwayne and Bill had both called him multiple times asking if he'd heard anything from Tracy. When Tracy didn't ever turn up, Jeff assumed she had moved in with somebody, and that's why he moved to Oregon in early October. They asked him whether he was surprised when she was found dead. He said, it did run through my mind, of course, yeah, but not deep down inside, I didn't think so, no. Detective Reinecke again interviewed Dwayne in December and asked him directly if he was involved in the death of Tracy Whitney. He stated that he wasn't and agreed to take a polygraph. Dwayne insisted that he would relay any information if he had any to share. He said, this is murder, man. I cared for her, I want to do everything I can to help. Both Bill and Dwayne took and passed polygraph exams. Both voluntarily submitted blood and saliva samples. Dwayne told several people that he felt guilty because he and Tracy had broken up that night and she'd been upset when she left. I know you're wondering where Tracy's parents were in all this. They did not report her missing either. They had last seen Tracy in mid-August and had a big fight because she was collecting some things and going back to Jeff's house. They decided she was over 18 and could do what she wanted, and they would leave her alone for the time being. Her mother finally began to grow concerned well into October. She started calling around to Tracy's friends, Brenda, Carrie, guys she went to high school with, and so on. After Tracy turned up dead, her parents expressed shock that Jeff and Janice had not notified them that Tracy was missing. Another angle police considered, besides the Jeff, Dwayne, Bill suspect pool, involved rumors that Tracy had been with a group of people partying at the Puyallup River. Jeff had admitted to the police that he and Tracy had been to a few keg parties out on the Stuck River riverbank. Tracy liked going out there, he said, but she didn't have a car and he had no idea who she might have gone with if not Dwayne and Bill. Her girlfriend said they never went out there, and the only person Tracy went to parties on the river with was Jeff. Jeff denied ever partying near the sewage treatment plant, which, if I'm being honest, does not sound like a good place for a party. In his initial interview, detectives following up on this party angle asked Jeff whether Tracy would have been likely to go out to a party on the riverbank. They were thinking perhaps she'd been picked up by someone to head to the river for a party. He said, "I couldn't imagine who she'd go out there with, that she would have met in the Burger King parking lot within, the couple of minutes it probably took for Dwayne and Bill to go out there and start looking for her." All of these interviews led detectives to conclude that Tracy had likely been abducted while walking home from the Burger King at 1900 South 320th Street in Federal Way. Jeff had told police that Tracy was known to hitchhike. Brenda said that if Tracy was in an emotional and upset state, she might get into a car with strangers. Perhaps she had taken a ride with the wrong person. Detectives left many unanswered questions about Tracy and about Jeff. If they obtained answers to these questions, they aren't reflected in the case file. Why would Tracy have gone out without her purse? Did anyone see Jeff at his friend Ken L's house that night or confirm Jeff's supposed alibi with Ken? Did Janice see Jeff when he got home at 11:30 if he did get home at that time? Why did no one report Tracy missing when she abandoned her cat? Was the walking route from the Burger King to Jeff's house ever canvassed by police in case anyone saw Tracy? Sadly, I don't know the answers to these questions. I hope that all those things were done, and it seems likely that they were because the investigation continued into 1989. Tracy's mom compiled several small notebooks with detailed notes about people her daughter associated with, including names, addresses, and vehicle and license plate information, and provided those to the investigators. But police seem to have exhausted all suspects who were known to Tracy and with whom she might have comfortably gotten into a car. The investigation branched out to consider stranger crimes of opportunity. Detective Nabel learned through a contact at the Puyallup PD that a man named Gary Michael Benn might have been seen with Tracy at the river. Ben, of Puyallup, was in jail for the murder of his stepbrother and another man, and was named by a local waitress at Ma's Cafe as someone she heard was with the girl who had been fished out of the river. Waitress Linda McCardle was interviewed by Detective Nabel on March 16, 1989. Gary Benn frequented her restaurant, and a mutual friend told Linda that he saw Gary Benn down at the river with a girl who looked like Tracy Whitney. But then the detective interviewed this mutual friend, and he said the woman he saw Gary Benn with at the river was in her 30s at least, and it was in the spring of 1988. Detective Nabel wrote, "It is quite certain that the time of this incident is not close to the time that Tracy Whitney turned up missing, and also this is undoubtedly a different female and a different location than when the homicide occurred. No further investigation will be warranted on this information." In May 1989, area Crime Stoppers announced a $1,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and filing of felony charges for the murder of Tracy Whitney. On August 11, 1989, King County Detective Jane Doe notified Pierce County detectives about a suspect they had in custody for a horrific rape and attempted murder case. Doe suggested Pierce County look at him for the Tracy Whitney case. On August 8th, Carl William Klussman, who was 19, targeted a pregnant 15-year-old girl who was walking in a Federal Way park. He started following the girl, entertainer Steve Allen's granddaughter Stephanie, and when she started running away, he chased her down, wrestled her to the ground, stabbed her once in the abdomen, tied her up with her clothing, tried to rape her but couldn't get an erection, so sexually assaulted her, and then strangled her with the drawstring of her sweatpants. She passed out. When he thought Stephanie was dead, he tried to bury her with dirt and twigs and then ran away. But she survived and was able to provide a description of him, and police found him and arrested him. He confessed and was sentenced to 58 years in prison in 1990. Klussman had already served 19 months in prison for the 1986 sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl. Besides him being a rapist and attempted murderer who was local and operating contemporaneously, there was more reason to investigate Klussman's possible connection to Tracy's case. This is all from the file. Quote, "Carl William Klussman has a history of sexual assault and mental problems. He lives in the winter in Arizona with his parents and spends his summers in the Federal Way area. He lives in Federal Way, very close to the area from which Tracy Whitney disappeared. Pierce County investigators obtained some handwritten pages of notes written by Klussman. The gist was his stream of consciousness fantasies about what he would like to do sexually to skinny young females that he encountered on lonely, deserted bike paths or trails. As described by one detective, quote, "They are his thoughts as he usually sits in an all-night restaurant about how he's going to get a skinny, large-breasted girl and rape her. He writes about how he will suck on her breasts and rape her hard both vaginally and anally. He also drew pictures of the women he likes, and some of these women looked like Tracy. He calls himself the Black Falcon." Klussman's written description of his fantasy rapes were very similar to what might have happened to Tracy Whitney. Since his arrest and conviction for rape, he writes that he must kill them now, end quote. In other words, after the earlier rape Klussman had done time for, it was believed he learned that he couldn't leave his victims alive. Tracy was one he did not leave alive. Klussman was also noted to have beaten one of his victims about the head and body, similar to how Tracy was beaten. This lead was interesting enough that Detective Reinecke traveled to the King County Department of Public Safety jail and requested an interview with Klussman. But the prisoner refused even to accompany the jailer to the interview room, indicating that he didn't want to talk to police officers. The end of this report says, quote, "This investigator believes that Klussman could still be a viable suspect in this case. Investigation to continue," end quote. Klussman continued to refuse interview requests. In 1994, a reviewing detective noted, quote, "Carl Klussman needs to be interviewed regarding this investigation," end quote. Time marched on. In May of 1991, Detective Reinecke received a call from the Washington State Attorney General's office about a pair of King County brothers Emmett and Jose Nash, who had raped and murdered a woman and in the course of committing the crime had bitten their victim on the breast. Of course, this is also what happened to Tracy. Detective Reinecke made contact with forensic odontologist Dr. Hampel in Tacoma, who had performed the bite mark analysis on Tracy Whitney. He said he'd already compared the bite mark in the Whitney case to the dental scans of the Nash brothers, both of whom had pronounced gaps between their front teeth. They could not have been the person who bit Tracy. Detective Gouda wrote in a case summary in 1994, quote, "The time and place the victim was last seen can be fairly certainly determined by using 3 separate witnesses. The time of discovery of the body leaves about a 12-hour window of opportunity." Detective Gouda wrote that the probability of a solution was minimal, with the only 2 strong pieces of evidence questionable as to their quality. He was referring to the DNA sample, which you'll recall was commingled, and the bite mark, which was of dubious usefulness.
When Mother's Day means celebrating your mom, your wife, maybe even your daughter as a new mom, trust 1-800-Flowers to help you celebrate every important woman in your life. With double blooms from 1-800-Flowers, order 1 dozen roses and get another dozen for free. It's a simple way to give beautifully, with colorful blooms that make Mother's Day feel meaningful. For every mom you're celebrating, order with confidence and get double blooms at 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast.
We can't really talk about a case in which a young woman was found naked and murdered in a river in Washington state in the 1980s without talking about the Green River Killer. As pretty much any true crime aficionado knows, the Green River Killer was operating in the 80s and into the 1990s, largely in King County, Washington, preying on women and girls and leaving his murder victims in rivers and outdoor settings. The Green River Task Force was formed in 1982 after body turned up in southern King County. The case file I have does not reflect whether the Pierce County investigators seriously considered Tracy a possible victim of the Green River Killer. She did not fit his MO in that she was not a sex worker. But the area of King County where the majority of the Green River Killer bodies were dumped bordered on the area of Pierce County where Tracy was found, and there is evidence in the file that consultation was made with the Green River Task Force. Detective Gouda's summary report in 1994 recommended that if a viable suspect's DNA profile was obtained in Tracy's case, it should be compared to suspects on the Green River Task Force list. But they didn't catch the Green River Killer until 2002, so put a pin on that. Tracy's case languished. A 1996 mini-summary by Detective Reinecke said, quote, "Since the inception of this investigation, there have been numerous witnesses interviewed and a great deal of follow-up investigation on possible suspects who have committed crime. There was no physical evidence collected from the victim, i.e. semen, fibers, hairs, clothing. It will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to make a determination of any physical evidence in this case if a suspect is developed," end quote. A case analysis was done by Detective Bruce Larson and submitted to the file on May 24, 2002. He concluded, quote, "A significant amount of work has been put by investigators into solving this case. The problems faced include the delay of 2 months in identifying the victim and the fact that the Puyallup River washed the body clean and removed important trace evidence," end quote. He cited Detective Guda's 1994 report stating, "Most damaging in the investigation is the lack of evidence associated with the investigation. No evidence was located at the body recovery site. The free-flowing water washed the body clean. The murder site was never found." Larson's 2002 report continued, "The positive aspect is that Tracy's left breast remains frozen and in evidence, with the bite mark of her assailant embedded therein. Through forensic comparison to the bite of Whitney's boyfriend, Jeff A., the main suspect in this case could be included or eliminated. The bite mark is, in my opinion, the only key to solving this case. Another possibility is the DNA processing of the possible seminal fluid from the victim's rectum," end quote. Following up on that, on December 4, 2003, Detective Larson submitted the vaginal, oral, rectal, and thigh swabs collected from Tracy to forensic scientist Christopher Sewell of the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab for updated DNA analysis. Sewell's report, dated May 14, 2004, stated that semen had previously been identified on the rectal and right thigh swabs in testing in October 1988. Quote, "The DNA typing profile obtained from the sperm fraction of the rectal sample is a mixed origin consistent with having come from at least 2 individuals. It is consistent with the mixed DNA profile from the thigh sperm fraction. This profile was searched against the Washington State Patrol CODIS database and no matches were found. The DNA profile will be entered and searched against the National DNA Index system." Now that they had a DNA profile of the suspected killer of Tracy Whitney, they could use it to eliminate lingering suspects. One of these was Carl Klussman, whose DNA was tested in 2004. The tests eliminated him as Tracy's killer. Gary Ridgway had been identified as the Green River Killer and arrested in November 2001. He was linked to the murders of more than 40 women. I covered him extensively in my Doe ID episode on Bones 17, Lori and Rose Potnick. When Ridgway was arrested, there was a whole revisiting of the unsolved murders in the area because it turned out he had dumped some of his victims beyond the parameters of just southern King County, and this included Tracy's case. A January 2002 article in the Seattle Times reads, quote, "From 1982 through 2000, there were 52 unsolved slayings of women in King, Pierce, Snohomish, and Lewis counties that are not officially attributed to the Green River Killer, but bear some resemblance to those serial killings. These homicide victims between the ages of 13 and 40 were either strangled or died of unspecified assault, and their killers have not been found," end quote. One of the victims listed and mapped in the article was Tracy Whitney. Gary Ridgway's DNA was tested against the suspect DNA in Tracy's case in April 2004, and Ridgway was ruled out. In September 2014, Detective Sergeant Tim Coble collaborated with Tacoma PD Cold Case Unit Detective Gene Miller. They consulted with Chris Sewell at the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab and decided that evidence items in the Whitney case should be resubmitted for DNA testing. Detective Sergeant Coble requested that the crime lab test blood from Dwayne, Bill, and Jeff and compare them to the suspect DNA profile previously developed from the swabs. They had all previously passed polygraph exams. A November 10, 2014 Washington State Patrol Police Crime Lab report eliminated Bill, Dwayne, and Jeff as the contributors of the semen found on Tracy. In 2016, Detective Sergeant Coble contacted Ronald Whitney about returning some of Tracy's notes, letters, and personal items. Tracy's mom, Wendy, had passed away. Ronald came in and met with the detective and became very emotional about his daughter's case remaining unsolved. But unsolved it remained for several more years. In 2020, Detective Linnell Anderson took up the case as she was reviewing cases for a possible grant application for private lab testing through the Washington State Attorney General's office. She noted that there were still swabs in evidence that had never been tested and that Tracy's breast was still frozen in evidence. She also noted that the analysis by the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab had detected semen on multiple swabs and a mixture profile had been uploaded to CODIS. However, based on the DNA profile ratio, the male contributor appeared to be approximately only 30 to 50% of the total mixture percentage. Detective Anderson knew that it was optimal to have the minor component be just 10% of the mixture or less. Technology had come a long way, so she decided to resubmit the vaginal and right thigh swabs to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab for analysis using newer technology. Supervising DNA scientist Marion Clark received the items, along with the other swabs and Tracy's blood, on January 12, 2021. The Washington State Patrol Crime Lab report was delivered on July 12, 2021. A male DNA profile was obtained from the vaginal swab sperm fraction. This male DNA profile was consistent with the mixed DNA profile previously developed from the rectal samples. The new male DNA profile was entered into CODIS, and once again, no matches were found. Using funds from a grant offered by the Washington State Attorney General's Office on March 2, 2022, Detective Anderson sent a DNA extract from the vaginal swab sperm fraction to Parabon for preparation of a SNP profile suitable for IgG analysis. Detective Anderson received the Parabon genetic genealogy report on August 19, 2022. She met with Parabon staff to review the findings. The profile was uploaded to both Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch. Parabon explained that it took longer than expected to get results in this case because the suspect had a very complex admixture of Louisiana Acadian, French Canadian, and Polish, as well as ancestors from Prince Edward County, Ontario. Typically, these populations experienced a lot of intermarriage and few members test due to cultural issues. Other matches were from Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. This was a very specific and unusual admixture which assisted in the analysis. The strongest matches were from the Louisiana Acadian population, pointing to the suspect likely having recent origins in the Cajun families commonly found in Louisiana, as well as more distant ancestry from French Canada. 8 key matches were found. The top 8 matches shared 116, 109, 100, 90, 80, 76, 73, and 54 centimorgans of DNA with the suspect. An additional 7 supporting matches were instrumental to the genealogist in figuring out the genetic connection. These 8 shared between 16 and 52 centimorgans of DNA with the suspect. Matches 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 9 shared DNA with each other. But because they were in Family Tree DNA and not GEDmatch, the genealogist, C.C. Moore, could not assess their relatedness to each other. These matches were all of Louisiana Acadian heritage, a population group typically affected by endogamy, so a common ancestor could not be determined. Match number 3 did not share DNA with any of the other top or key matches and seemed to represent a different branch of the family tree than the other matches, a branch descending from a union of Ackerman and Langdon. Matches 5, 7, 10, 11, 14, and 15 shared DNA with each other, but not with any of the top matches from the endogamous population group, so it was likely these matches shared a relatively recent common ancestor and were all related to the suspect on the same branch of his family tree. These matches made up genetic network number 1 from the Doty family. Genetic network number 2 consisted of matches 12 and 13, who shared DNA with each other but not with any of the other top or key matches. Because of the complications associated with endogamous populations, CC focused on the non-endogamous matches. She was able to find an MRCA couple for genetic network number 1. This was David Doty, born 1742, and Rachel Pickett, born 1758. Rachel's family hailed from Ohio. So she knew that the suspect must also descend from this Doty-Pickett union. As for genetic network number 2, the trees of the 2 matches were constructed to determine their common ancestors, and it was discovered by building trees back many generations that matches 12 and 13 both descended from the union of Anton Wojak, born 1802, and Antonia Zabluski, born 1805, both from Poland. Again, this meant that the suspect was also related to this ancestral couple. Because match number 3 was the highest match that did not descend from an endogamous community, CC focused on her next. She was born in 1927, and based on her shared DNA with the suspect, consistent with being a second cousin, it was likely that the suspect descended from one of her sets of great-grandparents. Building out the trees of all of these families, CC discovered that the oldest daughter of a descendant from the Doty marriage, genetic network number 1, had a son named William Brown, who married a Bertha Ackerman. She was the granddaughter of match number 3's great-grandparents, who had relocated from Prince Edward County to Michigan. Parabon's report says, quote, "This was an important discovery because it brings together the ancestors of match number 3 and the ancestors from genetic network number 1 into one pedigree," end quote. Bertha's mother was also from a French-Canadian family, tying into the admixture of the suspect. Further research revealed that William Brown and Bertha Ackerman's son married Susanna Wojak. She was the great-granddaughter of the Wojaks from Poland, who were the common ancestors of genetic network number 2. Quote, This discovery is very important because it brings together genetic networks number 1 and number 2 and match number 3 into one pedigree, end quote. It also incorporated familial origins from Ohio, Prince Edward County, Canada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Poland, and French Canada. CC concluded that it was very likely that the suspect was descended from the marriage of William Newton Brown, born 1894, and his wife Susanna Rose Woyak, born 1909. Based on their ages, he would most likely be their grandson. However, missing from this family tree was anyone of Louisiana Acadian ancestry. Quote, this means that one of the children of William and Susanna must have had a son with a person of Acadian ancestry from Louisiana, end quote. Of course, William and Susanna had had 8 children born between 1929 and 1940. CC mapped out each of these children and their spouses, and the spouses' trees were built backwards to determine if they could connect to Louisiana Acadian ancestry. Some of these Brown children relocated to King County, Washington. When CC got to the youngest daughter, Pearl Brown, born 1940, it was discovered that the first of her 5 husbands was John Philip Geo, born February 22, 1937. He was born in Louisiana, and he was of full Acadian ancestry. Pearl and John married on May 29, 1956, in Kitsap County, Washington, when Pearl was just 16 and John was 19. So the question was, did they have any sons together? CC located obituaries for both John Geo and his wife Pearl. John's obituary in 2021 listed 5 children. Pearl's obituary in 2017 listed 4 children. 2 of the children in the obituaries had the same names, John Jr. and J.M. This led CC to conclude that John Geo and his wife Pearl had had a son and daughter together. Therefore, their son John Jr. was the only strong candidate to be the subject. So strong genetic evidence pointed to the DNA belonging to John Philip Geo Jr., born on March 5, 1957. Genealogical connections were found to 15 of the top and key genetic matches through both maternal and paternal sides of his family tree, and all 4 of his grandparents' ancestral lines. And he was living in Puyallup, Washington at the time of the crime. But they had missed Geo by months. He died of cancer on January 20th of that same year, 2022. He was cremated and buried at Tahoma National Cemetery in Kent. Detective Anderson set out to prove CC's theory that John Geo Jr. was the killer of Tracy Whitney. Since he'd been cremated, a direct sample was not available. He was a veteran serving in the Vietnam War as a sergeant in the Marine Corps, but the Veterans Administration refused to provide any information as to whether they had any biological samples that could yield a DNA profile. And Detective Anderson learned that his estate had already been disposed of, so no personal items containing his DNA were available. They were going to have to get DNA from a family member to confirm the identification. And it turned out a direct relative of John Jr. had died very recently. On the day that the Geo family was planning on holding an estate sale to dispose of the items belonging to John Jr., who had just died of cancer, there was a horrific incident. 34-year-old John III, who was apparently estranged from his father, John Jr., was upset that he'd been cut out of his father's will after a fight 10 years earlier. John Jr.'s house alone was worth $600,000, so the amount John III might have otherwise inherited was significant. So at 5:53 a.m., John III drove to the Bonnie Lake house where the estate sale was happening and doused himself with gasoline. He then used his cell phone to call 911 and threatened suicide and said, "I don't want to stay on the line, I'm just going to light it." And he did. He set himself on fire inside his car in the driveway of the home. First responders arriving at the scene found the Toyota sedan ablaze. The fire had gotten so hot that all the plastic parts on the outside of the car melted into puddles on the ground. The back seat melted away, and the tires split open. Once they put the fire out, they declared John III DOA. Because this kind of death requires a death investigation, the Pierce County Medical Examiner's Office conducted an autopsy and collected a blood card, and it was sitting there, waiting to confirm the IgG candidate proposed by C.C. Moore. On September 13, 2022, Detective Anderson picked up the blood card of John Geo Jr. from the Pierce County Medical Examiner's Office and submitted it to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab for comparison to the suspect's DNA profile. She requested that the blood card for John III be compared to the suspect profile developed from the vaginal swabs collected at Tracy Whitney's autopsy. According to the report, which was authored by forensic scientist Marion Clark, John Geo III was excluded as a contributor to the profile previously obtained from the vaginal sperm fraction sample. The report further documented that it was 180 million times more likely that the genetic testing results obtained from the blood card of John Doe III would be observed if the source of the profile, John III, is a biological child of the donor of the male profile obtained from the vaginal sperm fraction sample, rather than an unrelated individual selected at random from the U.S. population. The probability of paternity estimate cited by forensic scientist Clark was 99.99996. Additionally, the YSTR profile obtained from the vaginal sperm fraction sample matched the YSTR profile of John Doe III. His father, John Doe Jr., had raped and killed Tracy Whitney. Detective Anderson, armed with these results, went and sat down with Tracy's father, Ronald Whitney, in February 2023. He told the detective that he'd been warned years ago that the case would likely never be solved, and he was emotional as he heard the news. He had never heard the name John Philip Doe Jr. and was certain that he would recall that name. Detective Anderson's final report says, quote, "Based on the totality of the extensive genetic genealogy completed on this case, along with the results of the aforementioned laboratory testing, it is now confirmed that John P. Doe Jr. is the individual whose DNA was obtained from the vaginal sperm fraction sample obtained from Tracy Whitney during her postmortem examination. With no ties or commonalities between Tracy Whitney and John Doe Jr., it appears clear that Tracy Whitney was the victim of a stranger abduction, rape, and murder. No other reasonable explanation for John Doe Jr.'s DNA being identified exists." Okay, so who was John Philip Doe Jr.? He was born on March 5, 1957 in Bremerton, Washington, to John Doe Sr. and Pearl Brown. He served in the Vietnam War and was a sergeant in the Marines. John Jr. was married at least 4 times and has 3 known children. His first marriage was to Connie H. on April 12, 1980, in King County, Washington. They divorced on July 28, 1983 in Kitsap, and they had no children. John Jr. married Erica B. on June 15, 1985 in Kitsap. They had 2 children, a daughter, D.G., and John Doe III, the one who set himself on fire. John Jr. and Erica divorced in April 1990 in Pierce County, Washington. But note that John Jr. was married to Erica and was 31 years old when he killed Tracy in 1988. John Jr. next married Tammy L. in Pierce County, Washington on April 11, 1992. They divorced in the same place 10 years later. They had 1 child, a daughter I'm calling A.G. John's last marriage was to Cheryl Lynn Garrison. I found this tidbit from KHQ Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Quote, "Local news reporter Dylan Wallenhouse caught up with a couple Thursday that have had a thing for each other since high school. They decided to tie the knot 40 years later. John and Cheryl Doe were one of many couples that got hitched at the post Thursday. John and Cheryl were both previously married. Cheryl lived in Florida and John in Washington. Throughout the years, they both kept in contact and are now living in Western Washington together and eloped to the Hitchin Post today for their wedding." End quote. All right, let's revisit the tragic death suffered by John Jr.'s son, John III. A death investigation revealed that perhaps John III was damaged by his father as well. John III lived with a buddy named Kevin, who said that John had been on a downward spiral shortly before his suicide. Quote, "Kevin stated John III had lost custody of his daughter because of domestic violence. John III had lost his temper and spanked his daughter and left marks," end quote. He had also recently had back surgery. The last straw seems to have been that he found out he was cut out from his father's will after his father passed away. He had researched on his computer how to commit suicide using pain pills. John III's mother was Erica, John Jr.'s second wife. Erica told Detective Anderson she'd been married to John Jr. for about 1.5 years before they divorced. They had the 2 children together. She confirmed there had been a falling out between John Jr. and John III. I don't know what it's about. John III was always in pain from his back and lost his job because of it. He had fought depression for a long time, but Erica didn't realize how bad it was until he took his own life. So what else did John Doe Jr. do? A 1989 motor vehicle accident report reflected that he was living at 13922 94th Avenue East in Federal Way, near where Tracy had gone missing from at that time. He had no arrest history but was referenced in some reports of note. There was a child abuse investigation involving his daughter A.G., in which John Doe Jr. and his wife Tammy were listed as others in the report, while John III was identified as a witness. Because this involved a child abuse case, I could not access the police reports. But there was this nugget from Detective Anderson's report, quote, "Additional PCSD contact with John Jr. involved a 2010 death investigation where his girlfriend allegedly shot herself in the head in their garage. Gio was questioned in connection to the death of his girlfriend in 2010. End quote. Okay, wait, what? Allegedly shot herself? That was a very loaded statement, no pun intended, one I was determined to get to the bottom of. Unfortunately, I failed. I could not find any information about this incident, the name of the victim, or even any reference to it. Detective Anderson has retired, and I could not get anyone at Pierce County Sheriff's Department to provide me with any information about this. If anyone knows anything about this incident, please reach out. However, I was able to find more information on a negligent homicide case Gio Jr. was very involved in. This was a family neglect domestic violence investigation in 2020 involving John Jr.'s wife Cheryl, who died on March 25, 2020. John and Cheryl lived together, and apparently John Jr.'s sister J.M. also lived in the home. Cheryl suffered from dementia, and her husband John Jr. was her only primary caregiver. Cheryl was found to have been left unresponsive on a sofa for 4 days without John Jr. or his sister J.M. calling for medical aid for her. When EMTs finally arrived on March 4th, Cheryl was covered in feces and urine and was in a fetal position. She was found to be septic, had open sores, and was malnourished. She was hospitalized at Good Samaritan Hospital, but died after apparently aspirating. Detective Jesse Hotz of the Pierce County Sheriff's Office investigated the neglect case and interviewed John Jr. on April 1st. Here are some excerpts from his notes. John is unable to walk without assistance of a walker, so the interview was conducted at his house. I started the audio recorder and advised him of his Miranda rights from a prepared form, which he stated that he understood and that he was willing to talk with me. John signed the form. John told us that he had been married for 7 years. He told me that he didn't understand what the neglect allegation was regarding. I asked him to help me understand what occurred with Cheryl. John told us that Cheryl got dementia 4 years ago and he has been taking care of her. He told me that on a Saturday morning, Cheryl became incoherent and she had a UTI. He told us he believed she had the flu, and he would wipe her up and tried feeding her water. John stated that he and his sister, J.M., administered Cheryl's medication, which consisted of sleeping pills, Vicodin, and antidepressants. John said that he gave Cheryl her proper dose of medication on the night before she didn't wake up. John said that Cheryl was incoherent for about 3 days, and he thought it was a fever. I then asked John to explain if Cheryl was responsive or talking during the 3 days. He said that she would throw up and lay back down and didn't have a fever. John claimed he was doing the best he could. Detective Stepp then asked John to explain why 911 wasn't called after 24 hours. John kept saying he believed Cheryl just had the flu. John denied that Cheryl had drunk alcohol prior to getting ill, but did say that she took antidepressants. John said that Cheryl drank less than 4 drinks a week. I then asked John to describe Cheryl's condition for us. He told us that she was sick and was on the couch sleeping. He told us that he had been changing her and she'd puked and had thrown up on herself. John said that he changed her diaper way earlier that morning and the EMTs arrived that afternoon. He told us that after 3 days, they called 911. She would wake up and drink only water and then go back to sleep. I pointed out to John that Cheryl went into the hospital on the 4th. John was convinced that Cheryl had the flu. John said that his sister was the one who called 911. He claimed that he was going all night and all day and was wiped out. John also talked about the dead dog and said that dog died a day prior to this starting with Cheryl. He said the dog was not his concern at the time and let the dog just lay there outside. A dead dog had been noticed by APS and photographed. John said he didn't call for help because he believed it was just the flu and Cheryl would get over it. John said that JM, his sister, was at the house the entire time. John claimed that he was just trying to keep Cheryl hydrated. John admitted that he should have moved faster and didn't. John denied having life insurance policies and started crying, asking us to bring her back. I ended the audio recording. Detective Stepp and I then began talking with JM, the sister. I asked her if she would consent to being audio recorded, and she agreed. I then advised her of her Miranda rights from a prepared form, which she stated that she understood. She signed the form. JM said that she came to live with John last year. She explained that Cheryl could not concentrate and could not understand regular words and didn't understand what occurred around her. Cheryl colored most of the time and would wander around the house. JM told us that Cheryl would kick and scream when John would try to put her to bed, but would go to sleep immediately. Cheryl slept on the couch because she had to use Depends. JM also believed that Cheryl had the flu. Cheryl would puke up the water John would give her. JM also added that John was trying his best for Cheryl. Cheryl stopped eating around March 1st, and JM thought it was about 3 days before they called 911. She finally called 911 and said they needed help. JM is also disabled, and 911 wanted JM to do CPR on Cheryl. She told them that she could not. March 1st was the date Cheryl went comatose per JM. She further explained that Cheryl was breathing and drinking water, but would throw it up. Detective Stepp asked again why they didn't call 911 after just 24 hours. JM told us that John said Cheryl would come out of it. JM waited to call 911 because John said that Cheryl had done this in the past, and on the third day, she came out of this behavior. JM told us that John kept telling her that Cheryl would snap out of it. Finally, on the fourth day, JM called 911 for help. She said that her brother told her not to. I asked JM how long Cheryl had been in a dirty diaper on the couch, and JM believed it was 2 days. JM denied seeing any sores on Cheryl, but did see redness on her. JM told us that one of them always sat with Cheryl for the days. JM said that John made the comment that Cheryl was shutting down. JM told us that Cheryl didn't eat for 4 days. JM admitted that it didn't seem reasonable, but she wasn't going to go against her brother. Gathering all this information, Detective Hotz forwarded it to the prosecutor's office for charging consideration in 2020. They started to compile Cheryl's medical records, etc., and were assessing whether to bring a case of negligent homicide against John Doe Jr. when he died of cancer at age 65 in January 2022. He evaded prosecution for Cheryl's death, his girlfriend's death in 2010, and Tracy Whitney's death. As a result of his death, the case of Tracy Whitney was closed as cleared exceptional death of offender. Quote, if John Doe Jr. had been alive today, law enforcement would have probable cause to arrest him, Pierce County Sheriff's Detective Lindsay Kierkegaard said in a public statement. She continued, from our standard, he was the suspect, and he would have been arrested for the crime. She continued, although there was no arrest made in this particular case, I hope that the family can find some peace knowing that Tracy's case is finally resolved. Tracy's father, Ronald, and sister Robin spoke to various media outlets about the case resolution after it was announced. From The Independent, quote, for years, Tracy's family held on to hope for answers in her murder, but that hope faded with each year that passed with no news. I came to the conclusion that the only way we were going to find out what happened or who murdered my daughter was if he walked into the front door of the police station, her father said. Ronald Whitney remembers Tracy as a happy girl who always had a sparkle in her eye. He said the pain of losing his daughter has not faded. It's something that never leaves your mind every day. I don't think the grief will ever go away, he said. It's the first thing I think about in the morning. It's the last thing I think about at night. Robin Whitney told The Independent, quote, in my head, I imagined we'd be going to court and I'd be sitting in the courtroom looking him in the eyes and watching him get sentenced to death or life in prison. Her father followed up, it's kind of an empty feeling because now we know who did it, but we'll never find out the true story of what actually happened. No justice, no closure. We just have a name, and that's where it ends. Robin participated in a Pierce County Sheriff's Department video saying, quote, Tracy was a good big sister. She has really been missed. It was hard growing up without a sister. I'm happy they finally found who did this so she can rest peacefully. And Ronald said, Tracy was a good kid. All the little kids in the neighborhood looked up to her. She was sweet. She was family. Robin gave an interview to the Yakima Herald Republic saying of her sister, quote, she was just young and it was just really unfair what happened to her. She missed out on being an aunt. I have 2 daughters that are also 7 years apart. So I see my sister and me and my own kids. It feels like he got away with it, and I know that we don't necessarily want to make this about him, but at the same time, I want to expose him. Finally, Robin spoke at length to CNN.com, from which I am reading verbatim, quote, Tracy's sister, Robin Whitney, was 11 years old when the murder took place. Following the loss of her protector, Robin vowed to avoid talking about Tracy, not to her friends, her father, or eventually to her daughters. I didn't want to think about what had happened to her and what her last moments were like and how scared she must have been, Robin told CNN. I'd also have to think about everything we missed out on as sisters, how unfair that was. She believed the case would likely never be solved, and thinking of all the what-ifs only brought fresh waves of grief and frustration. But roughly 10 years ago, Robin's father, who had avoided speaking of Tracy for decades, told her the police had recovered a DNA sample from the crime scene in 1988. The news gave Robin hope, and she slowly began sharing stories of her sister with her daughters. Robin also learned her father had visited the sheriff's office several times since the murder, hoping to revive the investigation. Robin had been waiting almost her entire life to learn the killer's identity, but the discovery surprised Robin in other ways. The overwhelming support we've gotten from the community that we grew up in and the general public interest and attention that she's getting feels like justice in a way, she said. People are talking about her, and they remember her, and they miss her. On the other hand, Robin added, he didn't face the criminal process, so he got away with it. Since getting the news that Tracy's case has been solved, 36 years of locked-up emotions came out all at once. I grieved her as a child, and now I'm grieving her as an adult, Robin said. I'm allowing myself to feel all of it, though. It's uncomfortable and I'm sad, but it's an emotional relief that I needed, end quote. All that from CNN. Okay, before I get into the conclusion of Tracy's story, let me touch on one thing particular to Washington State. This from a Pierce County Sheriff's Department release, quote, due to John Doe Jr.'s death prior to his being identified as the perpetrator in this homicide, his profile cannot be uploaded into CODIS. Next steps would include working with the Attorney General's office to ensure that case details and crime methodology are sent out statewide to other agencies due to the statistical likelihood that the perpetrator has committed other similar crimes, end quote. Wait, what? What do you mean John Doe Jr.'s DNA cannot be entered into CODIS? Yep, it's a foible of Washington's DNA collection law. If the offender was never convicted in Washington, his known DNA standard is not eligible to be entered. This is frankly an outrage. And it seems that Robin Whitney agrees. This from CBS News. Quote, we believe that John Doe Jr. likely committed other crimes, said Robin Whitney in a social media post, according to KIRO. However, since he is deceased and due to current legal restrictions, his DNA cannot be uploaded into CODIS. We hope that this policy can be reevaluated as it could aid in solving additional cases, end quote. You think? Of course it could. Wanting to verify this, I reached out to my friend Lindsay Wade, the decorated retired detective from Tacoma, Washington. She told me that it is true. Quote, if Doe Jr. did not have a conviction in Washington for a qualifying offense, then he would not be eligible to be entered into the state or national DNA database, end quote. But, she pointed out, the silver lining is that the unknown suspect profile would still remain in CODIS in the forensic index. So if there's ever another case that comes up with the same DNA profile, there would be a link between the two, end quote. Presumably then investigators would know that that suspect sample was linked to John Doe Jr. What a mess. If you live in Washington, consider writing your legislators to see if you can get this law changed. So once again, in the end, we are left with an incomplete picture. Thanks to IGG, we know that John Doe Jr. raped and murdered Tracy Whitney, but we don't know much else. Did she know him or recognize him? Did she get in his car willingly, upset about what had happened and wanting a quick ride home? Or did he literally snatch her off the street, selecting her in a crime of opportunity? Why was her blood alcohol level 0.08? Was she forced to drink alcohol? Where did the assault go down, and how did he select the dump site? He wasn't smart enough to deliberately make it look like a Green River killer case. He actually drove Tracy south from Federal Way nearly to Bonnie Lake, where he disposed of the body, farther away from where Gary Ridgway was depositing his victims. John Jr. was 31 years old and married to Erica at the time he killed Tracy. That's a little late to start raping and murdering teen girls. Does he have other victims? I believe his wife Cheryl was a victim of this nasty piece of work, and I can only assume, with the suspicious death of his girlfriend in 2010, where there was enough there for police to question him, that he may have had a hand in that as well. Back in August 1988, poor Tracy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, a particularly tragic end for a girl who had way too much drama and angst in her young life and never got a chance to grow into adulthood. Thank you to CeCe Moore for providing me with the information on the genealogy in this case. And if you are one of the bad guys, they are coming for you. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. Before you leave, please let me tell you about some important things related to the show. If you'd like to support this podcast, and in the process, get access to early and ad-free episodes, as well as bonus content like crime scene photos, you can sign up for a Patreon subscription for only $5 a month by heading over to patreon.com/DNAID. Of course, you're welcome to contribute more than $5 a month. We rely on Patreon funds to pay for the original source materials I use to research each episode. If Patreon isn't your thing, you can also show your support with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts. It costs just $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year. Your AbJack Insider subscription will give you the same benefits for not only DNA ID, but for all of the shows on the AbJack network, like Killer Communications and Campus Killings. Head over to Apple Podcasts and find the DNA ID page or look for the AbJack network to get started. If you're on social media, we'd love to interact with you there. DNA ID is on every major social media platform. Search your favorite platforms for DNA ID Podcast to find us. We also have a YouTube channel, and our website is dnaidpodcast.com. You can find links to all of these anytime in our show notes. If you need to reach the show, contact us by emailing dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Finally, if you want to pick up some fun DNA ID merch and represent the show, visit the store at www.customizedgirl.com/s/DNA ID podcast. DNA ID is researched, written, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt.